When people talk about the most dependable handgun, one name always comes up: the Revolver. For generations, it has been trusted by soldiers, police, and civilians alike. But is that trust still justified? And how did the Revolver earn its title in the first place? Today we'll break down the history, the mechanics, and the real-world reasons behind this reputation. And if you like firearm history and forgotten truths, hit subscribe. It helps us keep digging into stories like this, week after week. In the early 1800s, firearms were unreliable, slow, and often dangerous to the user. The idea of firing more than once without reloading seemed futuristic. That changed in 1836 when Samuel Colt patented the first successful repeating revolver. Colt's early models, like the Patterson and the later 1851 Navy, gave shooters 5 or 6 shots in one loading cycle. These weapons were strong, simple, and easy to use in rough conditions. They didn't rely on delicate springs or fine machining. Instead, they were built like tools, meant to take a beating and still function. The revolver quickly became a favorite in the American frontier. Cowboys, scouts, and soldiers all relied on them. In the Civil War, both the Union and the Confederacy used revolvers in huge numbers. By the time the 1873 Colt single-action army arrived, the revolver wasn't just a common weapon, it had become an icon. One of the reasons revolvers were so well regarded was their ability to keep firing even when poorly maintained. Back then, black powder fouled barrels and actions quickly, but a revolver didn't need precise cycling to function. You could fire it again and again, even when the cylinder and frame were dirty with soot. This kind of reliability wasn't just convenient. In battle or self-defense, it could mean the difference between life and death. So by the late 1800s, the revolver had already proven itself. It was dependable, battle-tested, and familiar. That trust would carry forward even as new designs tried to take its place. While revolvers ruled the 19th century, inventors were hard at work on a new idea: the self-loading pistol. In 1893, the Borchardt C93 became the first commercially viable semi-automatic pistol. It looked futuristic, but it was heavy, awkward, and difficult to shoot. It jammed often, and its recoil system was too complex for practical use. The Luger P08, introduced in 1900, was an improvement. It became standard for the German army in World War I, but it still had problems. It required precise machining and worked best with carefully loaded ammunition. In the muddy trenches of World War I, the Luger P08 often failed to function reliably due to poor conditions and sensitive tolerances. John Browning, the most influential gun designer of the time, tried a different approach. He introduced a series of blowback pistols that were simpler and easier to produce. His designs eventually led to the Colt 1911, one of the most important pistols in history. Still, early pistols had a learning curve. They had safeties to disengage, slides to rack, and magazines to load. Revolvers required none of that. You simply loaded the cylinder and pulled the trigger. Because of this, early pistols struggled to replace revolvers in everyday use. They were faster to reload and carried more rounds, but they were also more likely to jam, especially when dirty or handled by inexperienced users. Even in military service, many countries continued to issue revolvers during the early 20th century. Britain stuck with the Webley. The United States issued the M1917 revolver as a backup during World War I because they didn't have enough 1911 pistols to go around. So while semi-auto pistols were gaining ground, they hadn't yet earned the full trust of the people using them. The revolver was still seen as the safer choice when reliability mattered most. Here's a question for you. If your gun had been buried in the sand for a week, what would you trust more, pistol or revolver? Tell your answer in the comments. We will give our answer in the end. two world wars pushed firearm development forward more than any other period. Combat exposed weaknesses and forced improvements. But interestingly, revolvers remained in service long after pistols had become widely available. In World War I, trench warfare made weapon reliability a matter of survival. Mud, rain, and constant movement destroyed delicate equipment. Many soldiers carried revolvers as backup weapons. The British used the top-break Webley, which was easy to reload and built to handle dirt and grime. American troops carried the Colt M1917, a modified 45 caliber revolver that could use the same ammo as the 1911 pistol. While the 1911 was praised for its stopping power and performance, it wasn't immune to issues. Jamming under field conditions was still a real concern, especially with poor maintenance or bad ammo. In World War II, pistols played a bigger role, but so did revolvers. British officers still carried Webleys or Enfield revolvers. American air crews and some naval personnel were issued Smith & Wesson or Colt revolvers. These guns didn't jam, didn't need much cleaning, and were easy to train with. What stood out during both wars was that revolver remained in use because they worked. They weren't flashy or fast, but when a pilot crashed in enemy territory or a tank crew needed a last resort, they needed something that would function under pressure. Pistols improved, of course. The 1911 evolved into one of the most respected sidearms of all time, but even it required a basic understanding of how to handle jams and safeties. Revolvers did not. That made them a go-to choice for backup roles. By the end of World War II, pistols like the 1911 and P08 had proven themselves. Yet many militaries and police departments continued issuing revolvers for backup roles, thanks to their proven reliability in harsh environments. Reliability under stress, ease of training, and tolerance for poor conditions kept the revolver in service. The battlefield had shown that even as technology moved forward, there were times when the old ways still worked best. If you were a police officer in America anytime before the 1990s, chances are you carried a revolver. For most departments, it wasn't even a choice. The revolver was the standard issue sidearm. One reason was training. Revolvers were easy to teach. Officers didn't have to learn how to clear malfunctions or deal with safeties. They were taught to draw, aim, and fire. That simplicity was seen as safer, especially in stressful situations where fine motor skills break down. Another reason was liability. Departments worried that officers might make mistakes with pistols. Accidental discharges, misfeeds, and improper reloads could lead to tragedy. Revolvers, with their heavy double-action triggers and manual reloading, felt safer to administrators. Cost and maintenance also played a role. Revolvers required less upkeep, they had fewer parts, and could go longer without cleaning. For departments without big budgets or skilled armorers, that was a plus. From the Smith & Wesson Model 10 to the Colt Python, revolvers were everywhere in law enforcement. They saw thousands of draws and countless holster hours. Many officers carried speed loaders, but most simply trained to make their first 6 rounds count. Some departments, like the NYPD, resisted the switch to pistols for decades. Even when criminals began carrying high-capacity handguns in the 1980s, many police forces still issued revolvers. The real shift began in the late 1980s when pistols, particularly the Glock 17, began to demonstrate superior reliability, capacity, and speed over revolvers, making them the preferred choice for modern law enforcement. But even now, in some rural departments or special roles, revolvers are still trusted because when all else fails, they still do their job. The game-changing moment came in the late 1980s with the introduction of the Glock 17. Lightweight, durable, and easy to maintain, the Glock revolutionized handgun design by combining reliability with a polymer frame and a striker-fired mechanism. Made from polymer and steel, the Glock had fewer parts than older pistols. It didn't have a manual safety. With a striker-fired system and a 17-round magazine, the Glock offered both simplicity and firepower firepower in one lightweight package. Law enforcement noticed. Police departments began testing it alongside older revolvers and early semi-autos. Glock pistols performed well in torture tests. They kept firing after being frozen, submerged, and buried. Training improved too. Officers were taught how to clear malfunctions and reload efficiently. Modern ammunition became more consistent. All of this helped reduce the gap in reliability. Other manufacturers like Sig Sauer and Beretta also raised their standards. The Sig P226 and the Beretta 92 became known for their toughness and accuracy. These new pistols proved that semi-autos could be just as dependable as revolvers, if not more so in certain conditions. Pistols had another clear advantage: capacity. A revolver might carry 6 rounds. A Glock carried almost 3 times that, and when reloading was as simple as slapping in a new magazine, the pistol became much faster in extended encounters. By the 1990s, the shift was complete. Most police departments had moved to pistols. Military units began standardizing modern handguns. Even civilians started choosing pistols for self-defense. The revolver never failed. It simply couldn't keep up with the changing needs of the user, but it never went away either. In situations where simplicity still matters most, like in the wild or for backup carry, the revolver remains a top pick. So back to our question, if your gun had been buried in the sand for a week, what would you trust more? The revolver still wins in that scenario. It handles abuse better and works when things go wrong. But today's pistols have come a long way. In clean, real-world conditions, they are just as reliable and much more practical for most people. The revolver's reputation for reliability was earned over centuries, surviving harsh conditions and battlefield use. While pistols have caught up in most scenarios, the revolver still holds an edge in extreme neglect or adverse conditions. If you enjoyed this deep dive into firearm history, hit subscribe. We've got more forgotten truths and iconic designs coming your way.